Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media.
Today on Spotlight, the Missouri Department of Conservation tells us the important details that we should know about these creepy crawlers. Plus, the story of why 10,000 St. Louisans gathered to see a phantom horse and buggy. And then step inside a very odd museum inside a historic hotel. But first, how St. Louis changed the way Houdini approached his act. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum, located in North St. Louis, is the final resting place of many who made history, not just for the city, but for the whole country. And while the name Frank R. Tate might not have the public recognition it once did, his mausoleum there, built in the evocative Egyptian revival style, certainly suggests that the man buried within had lived an interesting life. Recognized as one of the top theater managers in America at the time, Tate not only introduced a relatively unknown Harry Houdini to St. Louis, but also had a hand in pushing the illusionist's career past vaudeville and into legend.
In the early 1900s, St. Louis was still one of the 5 or 6 largest cities in the nation. Theaters were one of the most prominent sources of entertainment for most St. Louisans. And a great number of those theaters are owned by Frank Tate. He also ended up owning theaters in Chicago and New York City. So he was a huge part of the vaudeville promotion circuits that were going on at that time. So at Frank Tate's Columbia Theater, which was on 6th Street just south of the Washington Avenue Garment District, had vaudeville shows running continuously from 11 o'clock in the morning all the way until midnight. Every hour there was a show repeating. You would see comedians and acrobats and musical performances and of course magicians, which is what brought Houdini here to St. Louis for his first few visits.
Harry Houdini started life as Eric Weiss, the son of Hungarian immigrants who settled first in Appleton, Wisconsin, where his father served as a rabbi before moving to New York City. Inspired by the life of Jean-Robert Houdin, a French illusionist who elevated magic from a street art to the stages of Paris, young Weiss took on a version of his hero's name and developed his own act, eventually landing a coveted spot on a vaudeville circuit, if not on the billing. The first time Houdini came through St. Louis, his act was second to last.
In 1897, he appeared at the Hopkins Grand Opera Theater alongside his wife Bess, and they performed their trademark trick, the metamorphosis. What happened was they wheeled this large trunk out on the stage. Harry Houdini was tied up and locked inside the trunk, and Bess stood on top of it, holding up a curtain so the audience could not see what was happening. When the curtain dropped, the two had switched places. Houdini was on top of the trunk and Bess was locked inside. The trick did great for them, but not great enough to really propel them to the top of the pile.
And while Frank Tate and other organizers of vaudeville circuits made a fortune, Houdini struggled to remain relevant and unique in the crowded, ever-evolving scene. Taking some advice from a promoter, he began leaning into his elaborate handcuff escapes.
He had busted out of hundreds of different pairs of handcuffs. It became his go-to trick. But even Houdini realized there was a problem with this that was ultimately going to catch up with him. One handcuff escape is essentially the same as any other. When Houdini came to the Columbia Theater in January of 1908, he was still being billed as the Handcuff King, but when he looked out across the crowd, he saw a lot of empty chairs. And Frank Tate saw a lot of empty chairs as well. In a state of disgust about the small returns he had gotten on the night, Tate reportedly told Houdini, "You're not worth a $5 bill to me." When Houdini was writing about this exchange in his diary later that night, he wrote, "It's fear that attracts us to the man who paints the flagstaff on top of a tall building." He realized he needed to introduce a sense of danger into the acts he was doing on stage to recapture people's attention. So the very next night, January 27th, 1908, the crowd that had sat there yawning and disinterested the night before watched as a giant galvanized milk jug was wheeled out onto the stage. Attendants filled it with endless buckets of water. Harry Houdini stepped in and descended below the surface. They closed the lid and sealed it with a series of 6 locks. They wheeled a curtain out in front of the stage, and the audience sat in complete captivated silence. Attendants come out with axes as if they were going to bust this can open at any minute if all went wrong. Finally, Houdini whipped back the curtains soaking wet and alive. The audience roared with applause, and the milk can escape would become one of Houdini's trademark stunts. From that point forward, his shows had transformed from being acts of technical escapability to acts that had this illusion of danger, convincing people that they were watching something that could go totally wrong, that this was not controlled anymore. This was the moment, this particular night in St. Louis, where his entire career shifted focus and he dramatically reinvented himself.
When he came back to St. Louis in 1914 with a revised version of the stunt called the Upside Down, Houdini escaped this time in full view of the audience. Houdini's final visit to St. Louis was in 1922, but this time the performance blended live stunts with clips from his Hollywood films.
Vaudeville was seeing its way out with the dawn of films, and Houdini realized this was the end of his acts as he knew it, and he leaned hard into embracing film.
He also thrilled St. Louisans by hanging upside down from a fourth-floor window at City Hall, confined in a straitjacket.
It stopped traffic along 12th Street and along Market. It took him less than 3 minutes to escape from this regulation straitjacket while dangling upside down more than 60 feet in the air with thousands of people watching him.
In 1926, Harry Houdini achieved what was arguably his greatest escape, this time from old age and obscurity. The world-famous illusionist died from appendicitis on Halloween night at the age of 52.
Of course, his name has never left us. It really was a physical act that he was doing, but it was also about his ability to understand the magic of it all being equally about what people were feeling in their seats as what was happening on the stage. I think that is really the legacy of Houdini, that he was willing to put his body and his mind through this to just give people a little bit more and get one more round of applause every time.
So far as is known, Frank Tate never connected his $5 bill insult with Houdini's rebirth as a performer. The theater giant went on making money until his own death in 1934, his mausoleum a reflection of the fantastical vaudeville era that paved the way for an icon.
For more St. Louis stories, subscribe to the HEC YouTube channel. Connect STL from HEC Media.
October is the month David Bruns tries to avoid talking about particular spiders.
In this case, I'll make an exception. And I will acknowledge that this is really the time of year that we have our seasonal infestation of giant monstrous spiders in many of our neighborhoods.
Perhaps you've seen them or even eaten them. They are everywhere.
Those monstrous spiders are make-believe. Real spiders are not monsters. In fact, they're pretty small. A real spider the size of a cricket would be considered to be a big spider by most people. I mean, they're small enough that I could see. Here's a spider that I just have in a vial from inside my pocket. This is a harmless house spider.
As a conservation educator for the Missouri Department of Conservation, Bruns has an abundance of show-and-tell spiders from the real spiders he collects
Notice how it holds the front two legs together?
to the photographs. Bruns may have the largest collection in the Midwest.
I don't know of anybody that has as large of a collection of digital images of spider diversity as myself. And my photos really became the collection.
Bruns has several thousand photographs, 160 species of spiders.
All of the digital images that I collected have data that's connected to that.
It's combining art with science. Yet Bruns realizes one common perception people have.
The thing about spiders is they're freaky. They're freaky, they have weird eyes, they have 8 legs, they jump or move in a jerky motion, which startles us a little bit, but I know that the spider is not going to hurt me. Spider has absolutely no interest in biting anybody.
Bruns wants everyone to become familiar and not afraid.
Missouri has over 450 spider species that have been documented, and there's probably about 50 more that just haven't been found and documented at this time. Of all of those hundreds of species, there's really only 2 species that have medically significant venom for humans. That would be the brown recluse and the black widow. In more suburban and metropolitan areas, we're really not encountering black widow spiders. They're really more of a rural species. One of the things that I think about with brown recluse, when people talk about infestations, the first question that pops into my head is, how much stuff are you storing in cardboard boxes? Because that is their habitat. That's where we find that they're living and breeding.
But Bronze wants people to know almost all spiders are harmless. So don't be afraid of being out in nature. Just stop. Take a deep breath. Don't be afraid. Take a closer look at the webs, see the beauty, and watch.
Spiders are unsung, freaky heroes. And their superpower isn't just the diversity of spiders, but it's their abundance. About every week or 10 days, a spider is eating the equivalent of its body weight in insect pests. An acre of natural habitat or cropland, and that acre contains tens of thousands of spiders eating the equivalent of their body weight every week or so of insects. And these are the insects that would want to eat our trees, they would want to eat our gardens, they would want to eat our food crops. Just imagine what would happen if those spiders weren't there. You know, Halloween is the one holiday of the year that people celebrate spiders, only we celebrate them as monsters.
It's okay to have fun with the idea of scary spiders because, as Brun says, those monsters are make-believe.
HEC Media. Recognized, celebrated, honored time and again for excellence in the industry. HEC Media has been bringing home the hardware for over a decade. Arts and education to author talks, magazine shows and documentaries, individual craft achievements to overall excellence. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. In the late 19th century, 10,000 St. Louisans gathered to see a phantom horse and buggy reported by the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. Public historian Amanda Clark tells the tale of the Pine Street Spectre.
In 1887, on a chilly January Sunday, over 10,000 St. Louisans gathered to catch a glimpse of the impossible. The anxious crowd had spent over 12 hours packed shoulder to shoulder after reading in the previous day's Globe-Democrat that a phantom horse and buggy had been appearing daily for over a month. The so-called Pine Street Spectre would traverse what is now the campus of Harris Stowe University before vanishing. Eyewitnesses said that the buggy crossed paths with other vehicles and passed right through them. The Globe's reporter claimed that he had not only seen the ghost, but he had even ridden the buggy for a block or two, and he peeked inside of the carriage in search of the missing driver, finding it empty. Unsurprisingly, neither the horse nor the buggy materialized before those gathered that January day to see it. Police struggled to contain the mob of disappointed spectators. The next morning, the paper publishes a correction. They did not retract their claims. They only said that they had left out a crucial piece of information. The ghost never appeared on the Sabbath. Similar scenes would recur for several days, crowds swelling to 15,000 despite freezing conditions. Some residents of the upper-class neighborhood that was supposed to contain the ghost complained that their servants stopped working out of fear, but other people hosted lavish, specter-themed parties and seances. One young woman was treated to a very public display of affection when her suitor hired a ghost costume chorus to serenade her. Though many Pine Street residents continued to insist the specter was real, the curious hordes gave up hope after about a week or so. The story lived on for another year in the ghost's absence. It turned into a shared joke among newspaper writers who blamed the specter for unsolved robberies and stock market losses. Eventually, memory faded, and the story of the Pine Street specter became as invisible as the ghost rider and his horse.
Next week on History Spotlight, St. Louis's rich election history.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org.
HEC Media, bringing you culture and community. Find all of HEC's positive programming and award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
My name is Troy Taylor, and we're here in Alton, Illinois at the American Oddities Museum. I took this place over from a friend of mine who had an interest in odd things, but not the kind of interest in odd things that I had. I am an author, so I write about ghosts and haunted history, true crime, and the unexplained, but I also have a background in carnivals and sideshow history. So when I had a chance to take over a museum that is something that I had wanted to do my entire life, I started moving my collection in, and it's eclectic. So when people come here, we always tell them that the best thing to do is to expect the unexpected, because they never know what they're going to find. And we're constantly changing things, bringing in new exhibits and introducing new things. In the entry hall to the museum, we actually have a free section too. It's dedicated to local Alton history, and it has everything that you could possibly imagine and a lot of things you didn't know existed. We have a section on local hauntings, because Alton being known as one of the most haunted small towns in America. We have a section dedicated to our local hometown hero, Robert Wadlow, the tallest man who ever lived. Information about the Piazza bird, stores, businesses, companies that haven't existed in 50 or 100 years, but we've got stuff that we've collected from those places too. So anybody with any interest in local history, that's, as far as I know, probably the biggest local history museum anywhere in this area. In the museum, we've got a whole section dedicated to the spiritualist movement of the 19th century, which includes a collection of Ouija boards and spirit devices and a whole history of Harry Houdini and his interest in the unknown, because that fits right in with the sideshow stuff with the magicians and the magic. I also spent a lot of time writing about true crime, so I have a vast interest in that too. So we have a collection of true crime objects, things from places where serial killers lived, where crimes took place. We've opened a throwback speakeasy of sorts, dedicated to Prohibition and all the crime that came with it. We have a Knights of Pythias ceremonial skeleton. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of the fraternal organizations like the Freemasons and some of the others, especially the smaller ones, had these ornate ceremonies to join that confronted you with your own demise someday. And they used real human skeletons to do this, most of which were abandoned when those lodges closed down. Well, every once in a while, somebody will be doing some work on an old building and open a closet, and there's literally a skeleton in it. We also have a collection of haunted objects, things that people have actually given us because they don't want to have them in their homes. We're finding that the more you lock those things up in glass cases, the better your chances are that whatever was going on stops. But that's not to say we don't have odd things happening here on a regular basis. It's not uncommon to come in and find things moved around in the morning. We have cameras. We know that no one's been here, so we can't explain some of the weird things that happen. Again, expect the unexpected, because you never know what might happen while you're here. And then, of course, there is our sideshow and carnival section, which we are continuing to grow as time has gone on, collecting pieces from the sideshows of the late 1800s and early 1900s, the postcards, the photographs, the traveling items that a lot of those people put on sale so they could make a little extra money. Back in those days, that was sometimes the only way that you could make money. Let's say if you had, a third arm growing out of your chest or something. That's not something you'd be down at the local drugstore working at the counter. You needed to find a way, and a lot of people became very successful doing that. Some didn't, and there are a lot of sad stories, but there are a lot of pretty inspiring stories too. So we try to kind of showcase all of that and make sure that when people come, they understand what things used to be like. And that's a big part of what the museum is. I mean, we have a lot of history here. Stories that people maybe don't know, or maybe they think they know a little about it and find out there's a lot more. That's kind of been the idea of the museum. Well, we hope you'll come out and see the museum and experience it for yourself. And like I said, come expecting the unexpected, because that's exactly what you'll find here. And you can find more about our location, our hours, and information about the museum at our website, which is AmericanOdditiesMuseum.com.
Later on Spotlight, a spooky St. Louis story that was featured on the TV show Unsolved Mysteries.
Hi, I'm Nikki Leeper. I am an artist of any and all mediums that I can get my hands on, but predominantly I like to use recycled and found objects to sort of cobble together different creations. I have an idea, but I don't really have all of the details fully fleshed out. Those kind of like come when I'm working. I like to say that the art tells me what it wants. So with these are my kitchen witches, which are a Norwegian tradition. And so my idea for these specifically was to use the wine bottles to create a figure like I have been, but then I wanted them to be able to open so that you could keep all of your little kitchen odds and ends in there, keep them nice and safe. Their faces are made from a paper clay that I make myself out of junk mail. The bottle, of course, is a recycled wine bottle. And the whole thing is wrapped in scrap yarn, and the hat, shawl, scarf, all of that is just bits of scrap fabric. I've made figures very similar to these, but instead of yarn, they're covered in plastic bags that I like fuse and melt and tie together. Halloween is my favorite holiday. It is the holiday for creativity that we have here in the US. I grew up with my dad making my own Halloween costumes with him. And then I also like spooky things. Anything ghostly, anything witchy, anything a bit ghoulish, which is, I think, is pretty common for people that are always a little bit of a weirdo, of an outsider. We really sympathize with ghosts and ghoulies. I like making friends out of recycled materials, and that's sort of my end goal. I've always felt a very strong attachment to inanimate objects, and these little tiny figures are so automatically endearing. And so what I hope is when someone's looking at my work, they'll see like one piece in particular and know that like that's their kitchen witch. That's the one that needs to be in their kitchen, because there's like a connection and almost interpersonal connection there.
You can find the stories featured in today's show along with past episodes and more at hecmedia.org/spotlight. Halloween, a season of frights. From creepy costumes to spooky stories. And there's one ghostly tale involving a Ouija board that happened right here in St. Louis. And it was such a phenomenon that it got national attention on the popular TV show Unsolved Mysteries.
Beginning in 1913 and continuing for several years, the lively spirit of a 17th century Englishwoman named Patience Worth reportedly spoke through the board from beyond the grave. And by all accounts, Patience wasn't content with a simple hello. She composed plays, novels, and countless poems.
there was a woman by the name of Pearl Curran. She is basically your average middle-class St. Louis housewife. Pearl decides to take her turn at the board, and a person comes through, a voice comes through, however you want to describe it, a message comes through, and it's a woman who states her name as Patience Worth.
Day after day, Pearl continues to channel Patience through the Ouija board, transcribing messages from her one letter at a time.
To the extent that sometimes she was putting out 5,000 words a night, which is pretty amazing.
Christopher Allen Gordon, Director of Library and Collections at the Missouri Historical Society, says they have 37 volumes of transcriptions that Pearl and Patience created.
They're typed out transcriptions. We also have a collection of Patience Worth's novels and some of her poetry and a few issues of the Patience Worth magazine.
Through Pearl, Patience Worth dictated books, plays, and poems.
The story overall is pretty incredible because you have to realize it's not just about the story of this person who claims to be channeling these messages through a Ouija board. Pearl Curran was authoring stories and poetry through this channel.
Pearl's paranormal experience garnered her a large following.
Probably the most extraordinary thing was that she dictated an entire novel, and the novel, which is The Sorry Tale, was released to acclaim, so much so that it was reviewed by the New York Times.
Together, Pearl and Patience authored 6 novels, 2 poetry collections, several plays, and volumes of witty banter.
People were astounded at the story. It is an incredible story.
Some critics claimed it was a hoax, and Patience was just from thoughts that Pearl was thinking and not an actual spirit being channeled.
Obviously, people are questioning whether this is authentic or not. She had quite a few critics.
So whether this is a tale of truth or just a bunch of hocus pocus,
I put a spell on you. And now you're mine.
We'll never know, because only one person knows the truth, and she's not talking yet.
And her headstone says Pearl Curran, and underneath it does say Patience Worth. Took it to the grave.
Next week, it's almost election day. We'll tell you about the history of elections in St. Louis. Plus, from counting zebras to reintroducing beetles, what the zoo staff has been up to. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.